logical explanations, volatility is one area that particularly confounds the experts. Bank of England Governor Mark Carney recently commented that Bitcoin has pretty much failed thus far on the traditional aspects of money. It is not a store of value because it is all over the map. Nobody uses it as a medium of exchange. The European Central Bank (ECB) has also mused on Twitter that Bitcoin is not a currency, noting that it is very volatile, while at the same time reassuring everyone that it can create money to buy assets, the very function by which its currency actually loses value and why it's a poor store of value. So yeah, just walking you over the tweet. So somebody on Twitter asked, does ECB have plans to add Bitcoin to its reserves? They said no, Bitcoin is not a currency. It rather is an asset, and it is very volatile. And another tweet is somebody asking them, where did you get the money for the QE, which is quantitative easing? To which the central bank replied, as a central bank, we can create money to buy assets. Yeah. The lack of self-awareness is not lost on anyone here, but Mark Carney and the ECB are not alone. From former Fed chairs Bernanke and Yellen to current Treasury Secretary Mnuchin to the president himself, all have at times trumpeted the idea that Bitcoin is flawed as a currency or as a store of value because of its volatility. None seem to fully appreciate or at least admit that Bitcoin is a direct response to the systemic problem of governments creating money via central banks, or that Bitcoin volatility is a necessary and healthy function of price discovery. Yeah, I've been experiencing, I think I told in the last session, I have a flatmate who works at Niti Aayog and he's working as a registered investment advisor. And we discussed money and we were having really heated and contradictory debates about, he was fundamentally not either wanting to question money, I don't want to question his intentions, but I was just looking at how he's just not wanting to question money itself. And it was later discovered that he works at Niti Aayog, so it's like incentives speak louder than words. So I quickly understood that most people, be it Fed chairman or be it some mid-level employee at Niti Aayog, they are systemically not incentivized to understand Bitcoin. It's not that their intelligence level is any less, but it's like printing money is a drug that a lot of people cannot look past.
One of the things that it sort of reminded me is there was a quote by, I think it is a Twitter thread, and it basically talks about the fact that to win big, you have to be contrarian and right. Like the more you are into a space, the more you are thought to be wrong. And for as long as you are thought to be wrong, as in both the things, the quantum and the length of being wrong, is how people sort of, get rich or get successful, right? So I think in that sense, people don't appreciating Bitcoin or people not getting it is actually good. And that you can also look from the fact that the more people disapprove of Bitcoin, the more they don't understand it, the more time you have to stack as many Bitcoins as you can.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. That's a mention.
Yeah, the information asymmetry is still real for all its reasons. So yeah, even I arrived in Bitcoin 2020 late 21, but I'm positive about most people still not questioning fundamentally. It makes me sad as a human that how have we come to this world that most people have forgotten to ask very fundamental questions, which even a kid asks, right? A 5-year-old is more timed to understand Bitcoin because he's asking the right questions than an average 25-year-old. Bitcoin value function revisited. Consider why there is fundamental demand for Bitcoin and why Bitcoin is naturally volatile. Bitcoin is valuable because it has a fixed supply and it is also volatile for the same reason. The fundamental demand driver for Bitcoin is in its scarcity. To revisit Bitcoin's value function from a previous edition, decentralization and censorship resistance reinforce the credibility of Bitcoin's scarcity and fixed supply schedule, which is the basis of Bitcoin's store of value property. So we went over this in the last session. Yeah, this circle in a very rudimentary way. I'm not saying that this is exactly how it works, but higher price comes from more users demanding Bitcoin. More users come from people gaining confidence in Bitcoin. It could take 4 years. It could take somebody to be technically sound about how Bitcoin works. And more confidence comes from more security because people are investing time and energy and money in Bitcoin because they understand the resilient and the robustness of this network. And that happens because more miners enter the network, and more miners are entering because there's a greater incentive to start mining. Or I think Faisal made a great point that it's not always necessary that it's profit driven. It's to secure the network itself, because Bitcoin's value proposition, its scarcity, its fixed money supply is valuable in and of itself. Because for more reasons.
Where does this cycle start? They don't mention where the cycle starts and where does it end. Like, what's the starting point of the cycle?
Right. It's
Is it more confidence?
I think it's all of it. All of it. I think it's a it's like self-fulfilling prophecy that there's no one moment. I believe. I think it started definitely with more users. Satoshi and Halfini started, and they valued it, if not price, in not in terms of price, at least in terms of intellectual curiosity, and that got more miners. That made it more secure, more decentralized, and more confident. And then it started to have a life of its own. Yeah, and this is the supply schedule of Bitcoin. So every year, so yeah, it's like 2025. We're approaching 2025, and we're already seeing the flattening of the supply schedule. So I think Michael Saylor has been going on for the last 1 year that 2024 to 2034 will be the gold rush era of Bitcoin. So I don't know if it might just be a marketing gimmick by MicroStrategy, but I think there's a good reason to be made that over the next few years we will see the Bitcoin's rate of supply going less than 1% per year, which I believe is lower than gold after this halving. So even if purely ecologically it's a landmark, it still has an impact because a lot of people think that a lot of monetary goods derive their value from their rate of inflation per year, which means that their increase in supply per year. And eventually in 2140, Bitcoin, the last Satoshi will be mined. Yeah, this and since then there will be all the Bitcoin in circulation.
I think the mining reward will keep on going down exponentially. I think there will not be a zero reward.
No. After 2140, I'm pretty sure that the mining reward will be zero. It will only be transaction fees. I mean, Satoshi is the lowest unit, right? It cannot go lower than that, one Satoshi. So after 2140, I don't know the block height, but after that block, there will be more Satoshis or block subsidy in any future blocks. I think it's a logarithmic function of Bitcoin's supply schedule, and after 32nd or 33rd, I think 33rd halving, if you count zero as the first halving, which is 2009 to 2012.
I mean, that date was stipulated 2140 or whatever that date is. After that date, there will be absolutely zero Coinbase rewards because Bitcoins are not going to be 21 million. They're going to be slightly less than 21 million. So once we reach that final, block that is stipulated, we will not have any block rewards even if we don't reach, because mathematically Bala's right, the number will keep on decreasing till it reaches 21 million, which is going to take a lot of time. Okay, but it will not keep on decreasing. After that stipulated date, it will cease. Even if it doesn't reach 21 million, it will not. So the number of Bitcoins ever mined are not going to be exactly 21 million. They rounded up to 21 million, slightly less than that.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to.
Yeah, see, this is the number.
Yeah.
Right. So this is like literally just one Satoshi, not even one Satoshi less than 21 million. But I think we will round it off to one Satoshi, and after that it will be realistically zero Satoshis. But I think Bala, your point is that it will keep on continuing, right? Even after that, it will never be zero, is it?
It will not. We'll stop.
No.
That's why we'll never reach 21 million, right? We'll stop at that figure, 20 million, 999, whatever that is. We'll stop after that. After that, it will be zero.
Right.
Yeah.
Look at that.
We will not I was trying to say that we will not reach the exact number.
Right.
Right. While demand is increasing by orders of magnitude, there is no supply response because Bitcoin supply schedule is fixed. The disparity in the rate of increase in demand, which is variable, versus supply, which is fixed, combined with imperfect knowledge amongst market participants, causes volatility as a function of price discovery. As Nassim Taleb writes in The Black Swan of Cairo, Variation is information. When there is no variation, there is no information. As Bitcoin's value increases, it communicates information despite the volatility. The variation is the information. Higher value, dependent on variation, causes Bitcoin to become relevant to new pools of capital and new entrants, which then stokes an adoption wave. Right. So yeah, ultimately the simple value thesis is that the supply is fixed and the increase in demand is potentially infinite. So this is what causes the higher increase in price and number of users and value and security of the network. And there is volatility. In my understanding, the simple framework is because most humans are not understanding Bitcoin. They are understanding or they're investing their time, energy, money in Bitcoin because of some favorite person that they like, and because inherently human emotions and human nature is not some straight line. It's a very volatile trajectory. So we see that en masse in Bitcoin price, that we see crazy levels of volatility. If you study empirically, I think Bala has also been sharing resources with me about power law in Bitcoin. You see that the variation has been reducing every 4 years. In the every 4 years of time horizon, you see that the volatility, both upwards and downwards, has been reducing. And if that continues, we will see over the next 5, 10, 20, 40 years that it will basically not, it will be flattened out over time. Adoption waves and volatility. Knowledge distribution and infrastructure. Second, adoption waves and volatility. Knowledge distribution and infrastructure fuel adoption waves and vice versa. It is a virtuous feedback loop and a function of both time and value. As value rises, Bitcoin captures the attention and mind share of a much wider audience of potential adopters, which then begin to learn about the fundamentals of Bitcoin. Similarly, an appreciating asset base attracts additional capital, not only as a store of wealth, but also to build incremental infrastructure. Example, more on-ramps and off-ramps, custody solutions, payment layers, hardware, mining, etc. Developing an understanding of Bitcoin is a slow process, as is building infrastructure, but both fuel adoption, which then further distributes knowledge and justifies additional infrastructure. I think it was in the previous session, or was it in this session, that some Bitcoin is the ultimate knowledge distribution mechanism, which was really profound in my opinion, because I think money after this information about value, and it's like if you follow that information, if you try to maximize your potential to create maximum value, the simplest metric is money. I'm not saying that money is the only way to value economic value human action, but it's a good metric to do that. And in a free market, ultimately Bitcoin standard wins, which I think will happen. You will see that all individuals will be incentivized to maximize their valuation. It will distribute knowledge in the best possible manner that humanity can ever come with. So let's go over this. I'll read the last sentence again. Developing an understanding of Bitcoin is a slow process, as is building infrastructure, but both fuel adoption, which then further distributes knowledge and justifies additional infrastructure. So knowledge gives rise to infrastructure, which gives rise to adoption, which gives rise to value, which gives rise to knowledge, which gives rise to infrastructure. Fixed supply versus expanding demand. So I'm not sure if I'm able to follow this graph. Let's try to see this. So yeah, infrastructure adoption wave. Yeah, I'm not sure if I followed this graph. Yeah, and this is the adoption curve. Yeah, innovators, like less than 2.5% of people are innovators in general by human nature. It's not even anyone's fault. And we see high volatility because it's a very small pool of people understanding and investing their time, energy, and money. And as you see, early adopters and early minority, then early majority, and late majority, and then the laggards who have to follow. It's not even their choice anymore. And because of that, you see the volatility starting to, I think this represents lower volatility. Yeah, I'm doing a bad curve, a bad understanding of these curves, but this is the stage of technology adoption S curve. It's a pretty famous curve in technology adoption across history, whether it be electricity, internet, or even automobiles. So it's typically said to happen in S curve. At first, it happens exponentially because early on there are very few people, but then it quickly rises, and then after a point it tapers out, because it's like humanity at scale has better standards of living. So it's not a new thing anymore. Everybody now owns a mobile phone. Everybody uses electricity and internet and cars. So it is like tapered out. There's no industry boom around cars or electricity or internet. Today, Bitcoin is still nascent, and current adoption likely represents less than 1% of terminal adoption. As a billion people adopt Bitcoin, new adoption will represent orders of magnitude for any foreseeable future period, which will continue to drive significant volatility. However, with each new adoption wave, the value of Bitcoin will also reset higher because of higher base demand. Bitcoin volatility will only decline as the holder base reaches maturity and as the rate of new adoption stabilizes. Said another way, for a billion people to be using Bitcoin, adoption will have had to increase by 20x. But the subsequent 100 million adopters will only represent an additional 10% of the base. All while the supply of Bitcoin remains on a fixed schedule, so long as adoption represents orders of magnitude, volatility is unavoidable. But on that path, volatility will naturally and gradually decline. Right? I hope this was self-explanatory, but yeah, this alludes to the same point. As you see higher orders of magnitude of people entering Bitcoin, the volatility will reduce because the percentage of new entrants is reducing every few years because it's a network effect of more and more people entering Bitcoin. So you wouldn't see a billion people entering and then more 100 million affecting price anymore, because in that proportion, a million to 1 billion becomes 10%, so which does not affect the price or the volatility as much. As
This adoption increasing, it's also a function of development that goes on the protocol. Without any
Right.
development of protocol, ensure that adoption happens.
Are you suggesting that it's because, for example, Lightning has enabled more people to be onboarded easily to Bitcoin, so we see greater adoption? And is that a good example?
Yeah, that is a good example, and it also underscores the problem that we are as developers. What we can see ahead, like if we want to ensure that adoption keeps moving, then we need different solutions on the protocol level.
Totally. Yeah. I think especially in the recent times with ordinals and now with the attacks on Samurai, developers and the innovations happening on protocol level have taken the center stage with Bitcoin adoption.
Yeah, right.
I think recently there was a hearing for the Samurai case, and I think I've not gone too deep into it, but I think it's mostly positive that the defendant have been saying that the argument is that writing code can never be harmful. So I think I'm yet to read if they have given them any. If there's any
Government
judgment.
The government has asked the court for some more time for discovery. They have not yet fully gone through all the materials that they have seized during the.
Right.
The defendants have underscored to the judge that senators have written a letter, like some sort of a representation to the Attorney General, underscoring that writing code is not does not make them a party or money transmission, like only for the money transmission part.
Right.
So next hearing is not acceptable.
I think this might be outside the purview of this session. We can discuss this later, but I'll just shoot a question and then we can take this up later. That I think the coordinator software for running CoinJoin is for free and open source, right? So technically there can be 10, 15, 50 coordination softwares, but I think realistically it ended up happening that only Samurai and Wasabi and few other, there were only a handful of coordinator softwares. So
the wallet is open source, but the coordinator part is centralized, which the server that they use is hard coded into the coordinator protocol, into the Whirlpool protocol. Where writing, they were on the process of developing a code product that can be like can be shipped out and any group of people can start their own thing. So before that could be released, all this will happen.
I think, yeah, I will definitely need to go deep into this because it's, I think, hugely important at the time in which we are living through uh, in history and in modern day. We'll continue from here for now. As Vijay Bhupati explained on Stefan Livera's podcast, establishment economists deride the fact that Bitcoin is volatile as if you can go from something that didn't exist to a stable form of money overnight. It's completely ludicrous. What happens between adoption waves is the natural function of price discovery as the market convergence or a new equilibrium, which is never static. In Bitcoin hype cycles, the rise, fall, stabilization, and rise again is almost rhythmic. It is also naturally explained by a speculative wave, followed by accumulation of fundamental knowledge and addition of incremental infrastructure. Rome wasn't built in a day. In Bitcoin, volatility and price discovery are core to the process. Right. Yeah. If I think anecdotally, also all of us have observed that even the most intelligent and the smartest people change their behavior when it comes to money. So it's no wonder that something as huge as global monetary network will see during its price discovery very significant amount of volatility. Historical adoption wave. For a more tangible for a more tangible explanation of the relationship between volatility and value, it is helpful to think about the most recent adoption wave from the end of 2016 to present 2019. So please bear in mind this article is been written in 2019, so it's like 5 years ago. This was the case. The demand has increased by 12x from 16 to 19. Supply has gone by 10%. This is the vertical price chart. I'm sure these are not interesting to ask right now because I think it's like reading history more than understanding Bitcoin because 5 years from 2019, I'm sure, I mean, all of us are aware that so much has changed about Bitcoin and the world. So this was like pre-COVID era. While Bitcoin can never really be quantified, a rough but fair estimate would be that Bitcoin increased from 5 million people to 60 million people, an increase in demand of 12 times from 2016 to present. Yet the supply of Bitcoin only increased by approximately 10% over the same period. My mouse pad is behaving weirdly.
How can the supply of Bitcoin increase 10%?
By 10% of total supply, I think. I think in 2016 it was 60.1.
Yeah. Total Bitcoin in existence. Okay, got it.
Right. And naturally, the information capital possessed by market participants varies significantly. As a as a massive adoption wave occurred, it was met by Bitcoin's fixed supply schedule. What would one expect to happen when demand increases by an order of magnitude, but supply only increases by 10%? And what would happen if the knowledge and capital of the new entrants naturally varies greatly? So I think why this is interesting to me is because this was true in 2016, 2019, and imagine the amount of pool of capital now and the information asymmetry that goes along with it. I'm sure this could just be my naive opinion, but even the smartest of hedge fund managers currently do not understand Bitcoin, even in the US, forget India. So I'm sure in India, not a tiny minority who care to understand Bitcoin. So forget the having the intelligence and the time and the effort to understand it. I think even in 2016, 2019, when Bitcoin was still, I mean, I'm not sure, I wasn't there, but it was still a relatively smaller network compared to what it is now. And even then, I've heard stories in about 2017 bull run that it really shot up and it went by some 200 or 500x. I'm not even sure, but it really took over the news all over the mainstream back then, which was not the case before. It's like 2017 was around the first time that Bitcoin started becoming mainstream. This is what I've heard anecdotally. The very logical end result is higher volatility and a higher terminal value if even a small percentage of new entrants convert to long-term holders, which is exactly what happened. New adopters who initially purchase Bitcoin in its astronomical rise slowly accumulate knowledge and convert to long-term holders, stabilizing base demand at a far higher terminal value compared to the prior adoption cycle. Because Bitcoin is nascent, the aggregate wealth stored in Bitcoin on a relative basis is still very small, $200 billion. So it's already gone up by 1.1 or 1.2 trillion. So this was by 5 orders of magnitude in 5 years, which allows for the rate of change between marginal buyers and sellers, price discovery, to represent a significant percentage of the base demand. Right, I'll read this again. Because Bitcoin is nascent, the aggregate wealth stored in Bitcoin on a relative basis is still very small, which allows for the rate of change between marginal buyers and sellers, price discovery, to represent a significant percentage of the base demand, volatility. So the base demand is what determines the stable price of Bitcoin in a sense. Stable price, and what I mean by that is just the floor price. It's like Bitcoin is never going down to 10K anymore for sure, because there's a higher base demand. There's enough people now that will never sell Bitcoin no matter what happens to the price. And that has happened over a slow process of accumulation of knowledge and over these cycles of hype and price discovery. So it's happened because of the rate of change of marginal buyers and sellers. And I think this will become, in retrospect, more clear about 2024 cycle, because I think there's a huge influx of buyers coming in without the process of accumulating knowledge about Bitcoin. So volatility is not going away. I think it's going to show its colors in the next few years. As base demand increases, the rate of change will begin to represent a smaller and smaller percentage of the base, reducing volatility over time and only after several more adoption cycles. Right. Managing volatility. If we can accept that Bitcoin volatility is both natural and healthy, why doesn't current volatility prevent the adoption required to transition Bitcoin to a stable form of money? Why doesn't current volatility prevent the adoption required to transition Bitcoin to a stable form of money? Very simply, diversification, portfolio allocation theory, and time horizon. There exists a global network, Bitcoin, through which you can transfer value over a communication channel to anyone in the world, and it is currently valued in total at less than $200 billion. Facebook alone, on the other hand, is worth in excess of 500 billion. For further frame of reference, US household assets are estimated to be valued at 125 trillion. So I think you must have heard that Bitcoin not only beat Meta, which was Facebook earlier recently, but also beats silver. I think it's still fluctuating. I think sometimes it goes below silver and sometimes it beats silver. But and for frame of reference, the household assets and just the household alone is valued at 125 trillion, and Bitcoin currently is about 1.2 trillion, 100 times less. Then real estate, which is a stupid assets. Like, why are we even valuing land as money when land could be used for so many other things? In a theoretical world, Bitcoin volatility would be an issue if it existed in a vacuum. In the real world, it doesn't. Diversification comes in the form of real productive assets as well as other monetary and financial assets, which mutes the impact of Bitcoin's present volatility. Separately, information asymmetry exists, and those that understand Bitcoin also understand that in time, the cavalry is coming. These concepts are obvious to those that have exposure to Bitcoin and actively account for its volatility in short and long-term planning. It's apparently less obvious to the skeptics who struggle to grasp that Bitcoin adoption is not an all or nothing proposition. Right. So it's like in the short run, of course, there are diversification in portfolio, but my personal opinion is that my personal opinion is that I want to be it's like Bitcoin is not a get rich quick scheme, but how I look at it is that it's a get rich for sure scheme. So it's like I'm not in no hurry to get rich, but I know in 50 years around, I'm pretty sure Ethereum is not going to be a good store of value. I'm pretty sure fiat is not going to be store of value, and real estate is not going to store of value. The only possible store of value that's going to become relevant is Bitcoin. So that's one of the theses that's good enough for me to invest in Bitcoin. The US assets. This is the curve. We can quickly walk over it. So as we see increase in liquidity, which is more and more people willing to buy and sell Bitcoin, we see volatility go down, and which increases purchasing power and increases monetary market share of Bitcoin. While Bitcoin will continue to still share the global competition for store of value because of its superior monetary properties, the function of an economy is to accumulate capital that actually makes our lives better, not money. Money is merely the economic good that allows for coordination to accumulate that capital. Because Bitcoin is a fundamentally better form of money, it will gain purchasing power relative to inferior monetary assets and monetary substitutes, and increasingly take market share in the economic coordination function, despite being less functional as a transactional currency today. Which is also honestly not true anymore. I think Bitcoin fairly does a good job as a currency as well, with Lightning and now with good solutions for using Lightning addresses and payment POS systems. I know India does not have any adoption of Bitcoin as payments, but you read stories about Costa Rica and Bitcoin jungle. You see that it's already being used as a currency. Bitcoin will also likely induce the definancialization of the global economy, but it will neither eliminate financial assets nor real assets. During its monetization, these assets will continue to represent the diversification, which will mute the impact of Bitcoin's day-to-day volatility. See example here, which highlights the risk return of 1% plus 99% dollar portfolio compared to gold, US Treasuries, and the S&P 500. Also see the case for a small allocation to Bitcoin by Zappos CEO Vences Caceres. Both provide a look through into how volatility and risk can be managed should Bitcoin experience a significant drawdown or even fail, which is still a possibility. Right. Yep. So I think Saifedean says this, that volatility, like invest in Bitcoin that you can afford to not lose over the short term to pay your bills. I'm not quoting him correctly, but the point is that volatility, of course, is a real threat to somebody who's using Bitcoin on a daily basis or has a lot of significant allocation to it. So it's up to the individual to assess his life situation, in my opinion. While failure is a possibility and significant drawdowns are an inevitability, each day that Bitcoin doesn't fail, its survival becomes more and more likely. Lindy effect. And over time, as Bitcoin's value and liquidity increase due to its fundamental strength, its purchasing power will also increase in terms of real goods. But as its purchasing power represents a larger and larger share of the economy, its volatility relative to other assets will proportionally decrease. The end game, Bitcoin will become a transaction. Oh, sorry, having some issues with my mouse, but I'll get it fixed tomorrow. Bitcoin will become a transactional currency over time, but in the interim, it would be far more logical to spend a depreciating asset, dollars, euro, yen, gold, and save an appreciating asset, Bitcoin. Establishment economists and central bankers really struggle with this one, but I digress. On Bitcoin's path to monetization, store of value must come as a logical first order, and Bitcoin has proven to be an incredible store of value despite its volatility. As adoption matures, volatility will naturally fall, and Bitcoin will increasingly become a medium of direct exchange. Consider the person or business that would demand Bitcoin in direct exchange for goods and services. This person or business collectively represent those that have first determined that Bitcoin will hold its value over a particular time horizon. If one did not believe in the fundamental demand case for Bitcoin as a store of value, why would they trade real world goods and services in return? Bitcoin will transition to a transactional currency only as its liquidity gradually shifts from other monetary assets to goods and services, which will occur along the path to mass adoption. It will not be a flash cut or a binary process. On a more standard path, adoption fuels infrastructure and infrastructure fuels adoption. Transactional infrastructure is already being built, but more material investment will only be prioritized as a sufficient number of individuals first adopt Bitcoin as a store of wealth. Right, a good example, I think, in terms of infrastructure is, of course, the Lightning Network. I think the paper came out in 2016, but Lightning Network realistically had its first implementation, at least on live network for people to use. Was it 2019? I might be wrong, but I think it was only after 2019 that Bitcoin started, Lightning Network started to be used. And it was only after 2021 that it started to be used enough that people recommended it, because in 2019 it was still very technical, and in 2021 there were good enough mobile wallets. I think by 2024 I have been using Lightning. Selfishly, Lightning is still a hassle, but in terms of use, Lightning has the protocol itself is has never created any issues as far as I know. Other than that, there are issues managing channels, and yeah, these are the problems that developers are actively working on. But yeah, I think this is a good example for how infrastructure has been funded because of greater demand for something like Lightning Network. Ultimately, Bitcoin's lack of a price stability mandate and fixed supply will continue to result in near-term volatility, but will drive long-term price stability. It is a little opposite model pursued by Mike Carney of the BOE, the ECB and its Twitter account, the Federal Reserve, and the Bank of Japan. And it is why Bitcoin is anti-fragile. There are no bailouts, and it's a market devoid of moral hazard, which drives maximum accountability and long-term efficiency. Central banks manage currencies to mute short-term volatility, which creates the instability that leads to long-term volatility. Volatility in Bitcoin is the natural function of monetary adoption, and this volatility ultimately strengthens the resilience of the Bitcoin network, driving long-term stability. Variation is information. This is by Nassim Taleb and Mark Blith, Black Swan of Cairo. I'll just quickly read these quotes. I think we have almost reached towards the end of the session, but I think we can continue towards the next article as well. Complex systems that have artificially suppressed volatility tend to become extremely fragile, while at the same time exhibiting no visible risks. Yeah, I think this perfectly summarizes what's happening with the fiat system right now, that it's so deeply leveraged that most people do not see the deleveraging coming, because it has artificially suppressed volatility. You don't see anybody having problems with the fiat monetary system directly tomorrow. It's like censorship is a problem, but other than that, losing value is not a problem that you observe on the streets every day. But these systems are extremely fragile because while they do not exhibit any visible risks, anybody who reads and understands how these systems work will realize that they are inevitably prone to failure. This is one of life's packages. There is no freedom without noise and no stability without volatility. Oh, this is Ben Bernanke's quotes. Okay, chairman of the Federal Reserve during the Great Financial Crisis. The Federal Reserve is not currently forecasting recession 10th of January 2008. The risk that the economy has entered a substantial downturn appears to have diminished for the past month or so, June 9th, 2008. We have read Bitcoin is not too volatile. Bitcoin does not waste energy. We can start this. I think we can cover the first 2 or 3 paragraphs. And then we can discuss it for a while and then we'll close off the session. Bitcoin does not waste energy. How many times have you heard the safety instructions before a standard commercial flight? You probably know them by heart, but every time prior to takeoff, flight attendants instruct passengers traveling with children to put their oxygen mask on first and then tend to the children. Instinctively, it's counterintuitive. Logically, it makes all the sense in the world. Make sure you can breathe so that the child dependent on you can breathe too. The same principle applies to the coordination function of money in an economy and the resources required to protect that function. In a more philosophical safety warning, the flight attendant may say, please make sure the money supply is secure so that we can continue to coordinate the activity of millions of people to build these hyper-complex planes that afford you the opportunity to even contemplate the problem I'm about to explain. Right. So this is why flight attendants need to learn economics, because if they did, they will actually say this before every flight. Please make sure the money supply is secure so that we can continue to coordinate the activity of millions of people to build these hyper-complex airplanes that afford the opportunity to even contemplate the problem I'm about to explain. We will come back to this, but you will never hope to understand the justification. You will never hope to understand the justification for the amount of energy Bitcoin consumes without first developing an appreciation for the fundamental role money plays in coordinating economic activity. What is money? How does it work? How should it work? What is its function in society? If you haven't stopped to ask these questions, you can't begin to grasp the weight of the problem Bitcoin intends to solve. Without an appreciation for the problem, the cost to secure the solution will never seem justified. I think I love these 2 paragraphs because for all the nuance and arguments and debates around energy, the simple argument is that even if Bitcoin burns a lot of energy, it is fucking worth it. That's the simple reason. You need sound money, otherwise society has failed. So in this paragraph, this was my summary of these 2 paragraphs. I'll quickly just read one more paragraph and then we'll close off. Any number of concerned onlookers raise the red flag about the amount of energy consumed by the Bitcoin network. This concern stems from the idea that the energy consumed by the Bitcoin network could otherwise be utilized for productive function, or that it is just plain bad for the environment. Both ignore the fundamental magnitude of how critical Bitcoin's energy consumption actually is. In the long game, there there may be no greater, more important use of energy than that which is deployed to secure the integrity of a monetary network and constructively, in this case, the Bitcoin network. But that doesn't stop those that do not understand the problem statement from raising concerns. In the context of climate change, raging wildfires, and record breaking hurricanes, it's worth asking ourselves hard questions about Bitcoin's environmental impact. This is by The Guardian. And the fundamentally wasteful nature of Bitcoin mining means there's no easy technological solution coming. This is by Vice Media. Yeah, we have reached the 9 mark. Any comments, questions? Please feel free to share. Otherwise, we'll close off.
None from my side.
Yep. Okay. Thanks for joining, guys.